In this episode, I'm going to answer the question of when you should hire someone, when to raise your prices, and what you need to know to have an objective perspective on what you need to do with your business. This is absolutely a foundation block to what you need to master in order to run and grow your business. Anything short of this, and you are simply guessing, and you're probably not making the amount of money that you think you're making. And if you need help getting more customers, I am now offering my marketing services to business owners, detailers, specifically in ranking your website to get it on the first page of Google so it generates leads and customers. Like that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years with my website and my business. And now that I'm starting a new company, I'm doing the SEO on it as well, which I'll be documenting in the future. So if you want me to personally market your business and rank your website, you can click the link down below, book a call, and we'll see if we're a good fit. But this episode is jam-packed with a lot of information. So let's go ahead and get straight into it. So the premise of this episode is I received a DM asking me this question, and something like this is far better to answer in a long form podcast versus like on a story. So the question says, brother, I have a question. How would you structure on pay for your employees? How should I be paying them? Days I have one car I knock off myself, but time is key. I have four guys, but only use when I have 3 to 4 cars and more per day. Usually it's just me and my main guy who is my eyes and helps me. How much should I pay him? I want him to feel appreciated and make money, but also not shoot myself in the foot. So this is a pretty loaded question. And it's a lot of it's gonna tie into each other, which is why I always say like it's never just one thing to grow your business, whether it's raising prices, whether it's hiring someone, whether it's introducing a new service, whether it's whatever, it's never just one thing. And I preach all the time about marketing and how important it is, but it's still just one part of the overall equation. So I'm going to kind of cover the two main things of when to raise your prices and then how to hire someone. Because for instance, and this is why I say like, this is why I stopped just like kind of trying to talk about like how much we're charging, because in the grand scheme of things, it literally means nothing if you don't have the full context of the business numbers, right? So if you see someone say, hey, we made $37,000 this month, it means nothing. Like there's no validity to those numbers other than it's a number, right? Because you don't know how profitable they are. You don't know if they're allocating their budgeted hours. You don't know if they're hitting the hourly target, their hourly rate. You have no idea other than, oh my God, they made $37,000 today or this month. And, you dig deep and it's like, oh, you're barely making money, So that's why, like I stopped posting about numbers and such because I see so many people post it and it's like, and then you look at their business like, yeah, I don't think you're making much money as you believe. For, per what I'm about to say right now. So, for instance, let's and I'm gonna kind of be all over the place because I'm gonna try to merge everything together. Because it's not just always like linear, like steps 1, 2, 3. So I'm going strictly based off of this gentleman's question. So he says, how much should I pay someone? Right? How much should I? How would you structure on pay for your employees? Because sometimes you have one person that works with you and they help you out, but then when you have 3, 4 cars, you have 4 people that you can call on. So the way to schedule your work, the way you're supposed to manage your scheduling, right? It's going to be based on available capacity hours or available labor hours, however you want to call it. And basically what that means is, let's say it's you, okay, person A, and then like this person says, there's another person. So there's person B. There's 2 of y'all, okay? And by the sounds of this question, it sounds like there's one person that's always working with him, and then depending how busy it gets, there's three to 4 other people that he can call on, okay? So if it's let's just start out with that basis where it's just you two working, okay? And I'm gonna make a bunch of assumptions here, so you have to kind of just take what I say at a high level and try to make it fit your situation, or try to extract what information best fits you. So if there's 2 of y'all working 40 hours a week, let's say, okay, that's 40 hours that you'll be clocked in, right? Which isn't labor. It's not that you're working on a car. It means general clocking time, because if you're mobile, right? Because then you have to look at the efficiency rate. Efficiency rate, not in terms of how efficient are you on the job? Efficiency rate between your general clocked in time to clocked in on a job. Those are two different things. So if you're mobile and you don't have good route density and you're driving 20 minutes here, 30 minutes over there, 20 minutes there, 40 minutes there, a lot of your time is going to go to just driving, window time. And that's where you lose a ton of money because you're paying 1, 2 people, let's say here, 3, 4 people at a time. And if you're driving around all around town, I mean, that's just money going straight out the door because they're not producing revenue when they're driving around. So efficiency rate in this context of what I'm referring to is, and if you listen to like a podcast or two ago, that's why I said like you need to clock in on every job. You need to clock in at the start of the day, clock in and out of each job, and clock out at the end of the day. Clock out when you're taking lunch because these things, maybe not right now where you are in your business, but in the future, once you want to hire someone, this will be very, very, very useful information and data to have to look at when you want to make these decisions. So if there's 2 of you working, right? If there's 2 of you working in a week, and let's say you guys are full time, that's 40 hours. So and then there's 2 of y'all. So that's 80 hours of clocked in time that you're going to have, right? That's 80 hours, right? Now, you don't literally work those 80 hours, right? Because you're driving, you're setting up, you're packing up, all these things. So you're not literally working because you're only making money when you're working on a customer's vehicle. When you're packing up the van, when you're prepping the van, when you're driving to the next location, you're not making any money. That's general clocked in time. You can't attribute that drive time to a specific vehicle or a specific customer, right? So let's give yourselves a really good efficiency score. And let's say out of the 80 hours that you're clocked in, 80% of the time you're working on a vehicle, okay? So for instance, like let's say if you work if there's a 10-hour shift in like on a Saturday or something, of those 10 hours, 8 hours you're working on a vehicle, and the 2 hours are prepping the van, driving to the customer location, unloading the van. You know, those are where the other 2 hours are going to. So we're assuming an 80% efficiency right here. Again, not on how efficient you are on the job, just efficiency in terms of general clocked in time versus clocked in on an actual paying revenue producing vehicle, right? So let's say you're at 80%. And again, to some people, you might be at 60, 50, 70. It's just going to depend, depending on your route density, the services, your team, what you guys do, your van setup. Like all this is going to affect your efficiency score. So if there's 2 of you guys and you have 80 hours together and you're operating at a 80% efficiency score, which is pretty good. Like that's pretty solid. Like that's phenomenal. That's good. Because again, drive time, traffic, you got to move. It's just going to happen. So 80% would be great. So that means between you two, in terms of what you can actually work, in terms of revenue producing vehicles, jobs, right? That's 64 hours. Okay. So when you're looking at your schedule and you're trying to book it out, your goal is to say, okay, I know between me and this other guy, we can have 64 hours of budgeted labor hours on the schedule. If you schedule over that, you either have to say, okay, hey, the other person, right? This week we're gonna have to work a little longer on Tuesday and Friday because those are the days where we're gonna go over schedule or over budgeted hours, over capacity hours. So if you're looking at your week for next week and you say, okay, there's 2 of us, and if we operate at an 80% efficiency rate, that means we can work 64 hours in labor hours, right? Between the 2. So if you're looking at your next week and you say, okay, and you look at next week and you say there's 50 hours on the schedule, you don't need any extra help because you're not at capacity with your labor hours. Does that make sense? Like you don't need to go hire or bring on another helper if you're at 50 hours of next week worth of work when you and the other person can take on 64 hours of labor. So this is the telltale sign of, do I need to go hire someone else? Well, if you have, it doesn't matter how many cars you have on the schedule. If you're not hitting 64 hours of budgeted hours, you don't need to go hire anyone because you two can already manage that. So if you go look at next week and you say, okay, we can typically hit 64 hours with 2 people. And next week, oh my bad, I scheduled in, let's say 75 hours worth of work. Okay, well on that one, again, it just means maybe, hey, we're gonna have to, on Thursday or Friday, we're gonna have to work 3 more hours per day, because we need to catch up on that. We need to knock off that one vehicle. So even at that point, you may not need to hire anyone else, because again, like, you don't need to bring on an extra set of hands, because you can objectively say, between you and me, we do 64 hours of budgeted hours per week. Next week it's 75, so that's 9 extra hours we're gonna have to put in, right, between the two of us. So that's only additional. That's only 4.5 hours of extra work for that week that we'll need to do for us to knock out this week together. So in that regard, you don't need somebody else to go help you. So this is a key part into how you determine when you need to go hire someone. So like, for instance, okay, and again, I'm making a lot of assumptions because this is all this is the entire message that I got. So if there's days, let's say like, okay, hey, like I have a team of 4, okay? Let's assume all the same things, that you guys are operating at 80% efficiency, okay? So between 4 people, right? Between 4 people, that's 160 hours of clocked in time for the week. 160, okay? Now again, let's assume we're working at 80% efficiency, meaning with those 4 people, you don't literally work 160 hours, because again, drive time, packing, unloading, talking to customers, whatever, there's going to be some lost time there. So if we are assuming, which again, an 80% efficiency rate is pretty good. Like, you're solid with that. With an 80% efficiency score, you should have 128 hours of budgeted work on the schedule. That would allow for 4 people to work on the schedule. If you are nowhere near those numbers and you're bringing on more people, I can guarantee you, without looking at anything else, you're not making any money, because you're overextending yourself by a long shot, right? This is why it's so important to understand these numbers, because if you don't have a grip on these numbers and you think, oh well, man, there's five cars on the schedule next week, you can go get 2, 3, 4 people, knock it out faster. You might not be making literally any money, which goes to my next part. So now you might be saying, well, what does that mean? Well, okay, now look, here's what this means. If now we have to look at, what's your hourly rate goal, okay? Now, this is something where the most common thing I hear is, oh, we try to make $100 an hour. Now, the big problem with this is, then the next question I ask is that in total, or is that per man per hour? And 9 out of 10 times, it's, oh no, that's in total. Which means if there's 2 people on the job working at the same time, and your goal is to hit $100 an hour, if you're working with 2 people, that is, in reality, that's $50 per person per hour. So you're not making $100 an hour. If you truly wanted to make $100 an hour, you would charge $100 an hour per man. So if there's a 4-hour job, let's say, that takes you 2 hours to complete, because there's 2 of you, right? So let's say you're quoting the job that's going to take 4 total man hours, right? But there's 2 of you. So that you'll get the car done in 2 hours, because there's 2 of you, right? One person works 2 hours, the other person works 2 hours. You work together, that's 4 hours, right? So it takes you 2 hours on the job, right? On the job, not man hours, on the job. So from 9 to 11, you'll complete the job. But it takes 4 total man hours. So if you wanted to truly make $100 an hour per man per hour on that job, you would charge $400, because there's 4 man hours, 4 total man hours on the job. Even though you're only there for 2 hours, it takes you 4 total man hours to complete the job. But what a lot of people are doing is they're charging They're charging $200 an hour, and they're actually making $50 an hour. Is that right? Yeah. That's right. Yeah, they're charging $200 and making $50 an hour. So this goes to my next point of, like, if going back to just 2 people working at 80% efficiency, if your hourly rate goal, again, doesn't matter, but let's just stay at $50 an hour. Okay, that's per person, not in total, because if you're saying, like, Okay, even worse. If you're saying, oh, we try to make around $75 an hour together, you're really making 33. What is that? I don't want to sound dumb. That's $37 an hour per man, per person, if you're saying you want to make 75 bucks an hour. So it gets worse and worse if you're not like really careful about this. And that's assuming you're actually finishing those jobs in the time you're saying, in the time you think you're finishing it. You might think it's like, oh, well, it actually took us like 2 hours, 2.5 hours, but we'll just call it 2 hours. No, that's if it took you 2.5 hours between two people, which means 5 hours, and you're saying it takes you 4 hours and you're disregarding a whole hour, and you let that compound over every week and the whole month, that's probably like, I don't know, a lot of hours that you think you're like, oh no, but we're good. We're hitting 75 bucks an hour. In reality, once you actually have the real numbers, you're probably making around $25 per hour per man. And with that kind of math, it's easy to say you're not making any money, right? Again, you're making revenue, which doesn't matter. You're making revenue. You're making $8, $15, $25,000 a month. You're making revenue, but the bottom line, the profits, building up your bank account, you're not making any money because you're literally so far off the actual numbers, which is why, again, this is really important to understand. So let's just say that your hourly rate goal, going back to the same example of if there's only two of y'all working full time at 80% efficiency, which is 64 budgeted hours per week, 64 times 50, 64 times 50, you should have on the schedule $3,200 worth of work, right? So now there's going to be two factors that you're looking at. One is your budgeted hours, right? If you know there's two of y'all working at 80% efficiency, then on the board in terms of budgeted hours, you can schedule 64 hours worth of work. That's one thing, right? The second part is, of those 64 budgeted hours, assuming our hourly rate goal is $50 an hour, we should probably be around the $3,200 mark. Now, depending on the services that you're booking in, your hourly rate will fluctuate. Like for instance, for us on a window tint vinyl wrap PPF job, we can hit between $90 to $120 per hour per man, right? Way better margins. If we're doing an interior detail on an average size vehicle, we're going to have to drop between $60 to $75 per man per hour, right? Because the perceived value isn't there. Cleaning an interior is a much lower perceived value than a window tint or PPF or chrome delete, right? So your hourly rate will fluctuate depending on the services that you do. So if you have, and again, this is why it's so important to understand this stuff, because you could technically have 64 budgeted hours on the week, but if you're booking in these lower tiered services, let's just take it to detailing, right? But if you're booking in more maintenance details, more interior details, more things that it's hard to push for a higher hourly rate. Even with 64 hours, you might be closer to $2,800, $2,700 for that week versus doing correction and coding, which you'll probably get. It's easier to get to the $3,200, $3,400, $3,600 per week. Same budgeted hours, right? It just the hourly rate you're able to hit is much higher, which means there's more margin, which means it's easier to hit those goals. So, for instance, right? Let's say with the very general here, 64 hours of budgeted work per week, and let's say the low end of your scale is $50 per hour. So on the low end, you should be at $3,200. But let's say you're focusing more on, let's say, correction and coatings. That's like the highest tiered service that we have for detailers. And now let's say with that, you try to hit $80 an hour, right? Which again, we're still working 64 budgeted hours. Just the perceived value of the correction and coatings, we're able to charge more and have higher margins on our hourly rate and everything. So it really helps us out. Let's say now you can get to $80 an hour for the same amount of budgeted hours, right? So now if we're able to hit $80 an hour for those 64 hours, we would actually make $5,120 for that week. Again, it's still on the same, you're still doing 64 budgeted hours for the week. That doesn't change. You're still working the same amount of hours. It's just now if you're able to book higher tiered services that have higher margins, working the same amount of hours, you're able to almost, not double, but I mean, that's a pretty significant increase between 3,200 to 5,100. That's no gimmick of a difference, right? So again, that's why with us over the next, starting now, we're really trying to transition 80% to film services and 20% detailing. Because if we work the same amount of hours, but we're able to hit $100 an hour for film versus call it $75 an hour for detailing, that's and I'll just kind of make that. I'll use the same example here. Let's say 64 hours, and we're at $75 an hour. That's $4,800 for the week, right? But if we're able to stay at $100 an hour, oh, let me write that down because I already forgot what the first one was. So 64 hours at 75 is $4,800 for the week, right? But if we do $100 an hour, right? That is now obviously that is, let me do that. That is $6,400 an hour. So now you see, like, we're working the same amount of hours. I don't need to hire anyone else, right? With the same amount of $64 and 64 budgeted hours, right? It's still just two people working at 80% efficiency. It's all the same thing. But what goes from, let's say, $3,200 at $50 an hour to $6,400 a week at $100 an hour, it's literally your margins. So going back to the question of what that guy said of like, hey, sometimes I have 3-4 cars and I have 4 people. In this example, I still don't need to hire anyone else. Even though we jumped from $3,200 to, let's say, $4,800 at $75 an hour, we're still only working 64 hours for the week. So in this example, you still don't need to hire anyone. Even if your revenue is going up, you still don't need to hire anyone because you're still only working 64 hours, right? So when you would want to hire someone, let's say, is that when, for instance, if pretty simply, if there's 64 hours in a budgeted week, and now you're really trying to cram up your schedule, and now you're hitting closer to 75, even that's not that much. A part-time person, you're starting to hit 80 hours a week of budgeted work. That's when it makes sense of like, okay, yeah, I probably need to hire someone else because if we're starting to book 80 hours a week, that's an additional 15 hours of budgeted work that, I mean, we could hustle and grind for that, but like that's not sustainable. Like I don't want to be out there 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Saturday. Like I want to have like more off days or just have a more sustainable schedule. So then it makes sense to hire someone. So this is what you look at in order to see if you need to hire someone or, and I'll get into the prices part. But this is how it should be done, right? Like this is how you look at, do you need to hire someone? So then okay, that's just the basic part, right? That's the first part of like, there's days that I have 3-4 cars and I get four people. So that in itself is, I would look at these things. So more often than not, probably if there's 3 to 4 cars, you probably don't need to have 4 people. You could probably still do that with 2 people. Probably so, right? And again, like that being said, if those 3-4 cars and you're making, it all depends on budgeted hours. Because again, like for instance, when we book a job, you have to see what your budgeted hours are, right? So let's say that, again, just keeping it general, that for your detailing services, you try to hit, $50 an hour. Let's just keep it at that, okay? So if on a day where you have 3-4 cars, let's say you're gonna make $1,500, okay? And again, your hourly rate that you're trying to hit is $50 an hour. So all you're gonna do is take those $1,500 for the day and divide that by 50, okay? So assuming you're gonna get the job done that day, like, that day. Well, now for that you have 30 budgeted hours to work, right? Which means you have to complete this job within 30 hours to hit your hourly rate goal of $50 an hour. If you go over that of 30 hours, you end up going from 50 to 44 to 45 to 40 to 30. You end up decreasing your hourly rate goal. So you have to finish this job within 50 hours. Within 30 hours. Now, again, that same job, that's $1,500 for the day or whatever, right? And let's say your hourly rate goal is $70 an hour. Now you only have about 21 hours to complete that work. So you see how now it's not about like, oh man, there's so much work on the schedule, I need to hire someone else. No. If your hourly rate goal is $70 an hour, you only have 21 hours of budgeted work, right? Which means if let's say 21 divided by 2, that means if there's only two of y'all could both work 10 and a half hours for that day to complete that job or to complete that day, however you want to see it. If there's three of y'all, then that needs to be done in 7 hours. It cannot go over that, or you're now over budget and you're not hitting your hourly goal anymore. If there's four of y'all, the $1,500 worth of work has to be done in 5 hours and like 10 minutes. Let's just say 5 hours, right? So if there's four of y'all, that should no longer be an all-day thing. That should be from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., all that work gets knocked out and you're done for the day. If it's taking you all day to knock off that work, I can, without looking at anything else, you're probably not making any money, or if you are, it's nowhere near what you think you're making. Like factually, that's how it is. So again, like, and the scary part is that when, you know, the lower the lower your hourly rate goal, the more budgeted hours you get. But that means you're working at a much smaller margin every single hour. So for instance, if you're like, oh, well, that, for instance, then the next thing might be like, oh, let's say it's $50, $50 an hour. So you have 30 budgeted hours to complete that day or that work, whatever it is for that day, right? And then you might say, oh, well, man, like that's not enough time to finish all this work. Okay, so now if you're looking at this job of this day, of these whatever, and you're saying, no, there's no way we can finish $1,500 worth of work in 30 hours, then the problem here is how you're pricing it. If you need to give yourself more time, let's say, no, like realistically, that's probably going to take us closer to like 40 hours to complete. If that's the case, right? If that's the case, then that job should be $2,000 and you're charging $1,500. So now the way you're pricing and budgeting those hours is way off, and that's now you have to adjust your pricing. And regardless, you still probably don't need to hire 4 people, because now if your pricing is way off, there's less margin, you're going to bring on more people. It just, the math is not mathing, you know? So this is how you look at pricing. This is how you look at hiring someone. This is how you look at, do I raise my prices? Because if you look at those numbers and you know, I'll switch it up now. Let's just say $1,200 now for the day. So if there's a day where you're going to make $1,200, whether it's multiple jobs, whatever, let's just keep it simple. If you're trying to make $1,200 in a day and your hourly rate goal is, again, $50 an hour, you have 24 budgeted hours to complete that work. If you say, oh no, that's not enough time between two of us, that should be closer to 30 hours. Okay, then instead of $1,200 for that schedule, then you should be charging $1,500 for that job. And if you're saying, oh no, but people aren't going to pay that, well, then now everything is wrong. You're pricing it wrong. Your budgeted hours are wrong. The way that how long you're taking on that job is wrong. And now you're not making anywhere near as much money as you thought you was. And so now it's like, so now what do we look at? Right? Can you move faster to get the job done? Or did this 100%, is it going to take 30 hours instead of whatever I said, 20 hours? Right? Like, what's the solution here? This is what you look at to schedule, for your prices, to hire. This is the math. Simply saying, oh, there's 3 or 4 cars on the schedule, so I need more help. That means nothing. That means absolutely nothing. Because if you have, you know, if there's $900 worth of work and you have 3 or 4 cars, right? But you, revenue-wise, you have $900 worth of work, you get 18 hours of budgeted work, of budgeted hours for that day, right? So if there's 2 of y'all, that's a 9-hour shift day. Do you need 3, 4 people just because there's 3, 4 vehicles on the schedule? No. Right? Like, there's just not enough room there. And again, that's assuming, again, $900, that's assuming you're going for $50 an hour. If you're like, oh no, we're about $70 an hour. Okay, so on a $900 day at $70 per hour, you have roughly right under 13 hours of budgeted hours, right? And again, you divide that by 2, that's roughly, the whole day should be done in 6.5 hours. In terms of working, right? Maybe if you're driving, yada, yada, that's different. But in terms of like actual working on the customer vehicles and producing revenue, that's 6.5 hours of work. So again, going through all this, if we figure all this out and you're like, oh no, like that's not enough hours, or oh no, that's not enough, whatever, it's like, oh, you don't need to hire anyone for that additional work. Like y'all two should be able to figure it out because again, maybe it is a lot more work, but maybe you're pricing it so low that there's no meat on the bone to bring on any other help. Like you have to do this with just y'all two because like the prices are so low that if you bring on literally anyone else, you're no longer making any money at all. Like the whole day, you're literally not making any money. And obviously, like that's not sustainable. That you can't grow the business like that. Like you're gonna keep on hitting problem and problem and problem financially because you're not making any money, right? So when you figure out these numbers and you say, oh yeah, that's not enough budgeted hours, and there's two things you can play. Well, there's three things, right? There's your budgeted hour. So if you are staying at $50 an hour and you're quoting it at 10 hours, so that's gonna be $500, right? I'm sorry, that's way off. Wait, what? Am I right? Yeah. It's way different to do math when you're trying to talk at the same time. So let's say you stay at $50 an hour, right? And you're saying, okay, typically that job I'm gonna quote for 10 hours, so it's gonna be $500, right? And now you're saying, yeah, that's too low. Like that's not okay. Well, now look at it more accurately, and if and let's say maybe it takes you 14 hours now. Like you're trying to be closer to like, okay, actually it should take us closer to 14 hours to finish that. Okay, so we're still gonna stay with $50 an hour, right? And now we're gonna increase our budgeted hours. We're keeping the hourly rate go the same, but the budgeted hours we're gonna go to 14 hours now. So now we need to quote that job at $700 an hour, right? So with this one, we're just playing with the budgeted hours. We're keeping the hourly rate the same. And I'll talk about the third thing that we can do. The next thing that we can look at is maybe, you're good at speed, but you just want to make more money. Okay, well now, let's say we go back to that 10-hour example, right? And instead of trying to make $50 an hour, we're now making $70 an hour. So on the same job that takes you 10 hours, but you're now charging $70 per man per hour, then now you need to quote that job at $700, right? And of course, if you want a higher hourly rate of $70 an hour and you want to increase your budgeted hours to 14 hours, that job should now be quoted at $980 for the job. Okay. Now you might say, well, no, who's going to pay that for this kind of service? Well, that's kind of the thing you need to figure out. Where do you find quality customers that will pay that, right? Does it make sense to try to make that for that kind of service, right? These are the things you have to figure out in your business, in your market, and what you're doing. This is why we're moving away from detailing, and we're trying to get to 80% of our services being film related and 20% being detailing, simply due to the fact that the margins, it's comparing apples to oranges when it comes to the margins. Like there's so much more that you can do with film because it's a higher perceived value. Again, like well, in the beginning when we first started offering tint, we were way off because we were still learning. But over the last 3 months, I don't think there's been one window tint job where we haven't hit at least $85 an hour with one person. This isn't like, oh, we have one person, right? Because then again, this is why it's so important to understand your numbers. It's not about, oh, there's 3-4 cars on the schedule. That literally means nothing in the grand scheme of things, right? So let's say like, again, making a lot of assumptions here, but let's say you have an employee that works full time, right? So that's 160 hours a month times 12 is 1,000. It's 1,920, right? And again, let's stay with the 80% efficiency. Let's be generous and let's say 85% efficiency, right? So over the year, they'll clock in 1,920 hours, but the hours that they're clocked in working on a vehicle that's revenue generating, it's 1,632 hours, okay? So now, if you're charging $50 an hour, right, that one employee should be able to generate $81,600 for your business. That one employee, okay? And that's at $50 an hour. Taking the same amount of hours, right? 1,632 hours. And now you can hit $80 an hour for whatever services, whatever you're doing. That same employee can now generate $130,560 per one employee, right? This is what this is what you get to see of like, oh, do I need to hire someone else, right? And this is why you need to figure out these numbers in your business, because this is what tells you, do I need to hire someone else? So now, like for instance, if you know, let's say you have 3 vans, right, with 2 people in each one. Okay, rough math here, but just follow with me. Let's just say 2 vans to keep it simple, right? Let's say you know, and again, most you might see another, not just detail, just in general, you'll see this. We're like, hey, we got another van, we're getting more employees, whatever, we're growing. If those 4 employees, right, are working at 85% efficiency, and let's be generous, and let's say their hourly rate goal is $70 an hour. So now what we do is take 1,632 hours times 4, right? Because there's 4 of them, and we're already compensating for the 85% efficiency, right? They're like super efficient, and the hourly rate goal for everyone is $70 an hour, right? Oh, what am I doing here? 1,632 times 4 times 70. So between those 4 employees, or let's say those 2 crews, right? Because maybe you're included in one of those. Between those 2 crews, you should probably make around $456,960 between those 4 people. Now you'll know a lot better of, do I need to hire someone? Okay. And again, this is why like it's not just one thing of like, oh well, that's wrong, so fix that. It's like you have to look at everything. It's not just saying, hey, when did I raise my prices? Well, a simple thing could be like when you're at capacity, meaning when you keep on hitting 64 hours per week every week, and it keeps on almost going to like 70, 75, 80 hours a week. At that point, you can raise your prices because you're at capacity. Like if you don't want to book in more work and keep on working 64 hours a week, but you want to make more money, well, yeah, right there, it makes total sense to raise your prices because you're hitting capacity. Like you don't want to go past capacity. You want to stay with 2 people. So instead of charging, $50 an hour, you raise it to $60 an hour. And now, even like you might lower your capacity, but you'll be making more money. And over time, you just raise your capacity again, right? So that's how you see if you should raise prices. It's not just of like, oh, well, I've been doing this for so long, so I guess I should raise them. No, like these are the factors you look at to see if you're when it makes sense to raise your prices, right? So with 4 people, there's 2 crews, 4 people, that you should be making around $450,000 per year with that crew. And again, that's assuming it's at $70 an hour, right? Because maybe you have a crew of 4, right? And you're like, whoa, we're not making anywhere near that. Well, that's probably because your the value of your services, how you the perceived value, your customers, and maybe let's go back again. Let's do that again. That's 6,502 for 4. So now you say, okay, well, I'm making closer to. Well, let's say your hourly rate goal is $50 an hour, right? With those 4 people, so that would be $326,400. That those 4 people, including yourself, if you're in there, that's how much you should be able to generate if you're at around $50 an hour, right? And then you might be saying, oh well, like I'm still not making that. It's like, so now you have a big problem, right? So what is it like? Let's say if you're let's say there's 4 of you working full time, right, at 85% efficiency, which is really good. And let's say you make $163,000. Well, $163,200, right? If that's closer to the number you're hitting, you're making $25 an hour, which means either you're pricing very, very low, or your crew is nowhere near 85% efficiency, and you're more like at 60% efficiency, right? So the 3 things you can manipulate or kind of focus on is your budgeted hours, meaning at this job, I've been quoting 10, it should really be 15, while you keep your hourly rate the same. Second part is, well, the budgeted hours is good. It takes us about, and I'm just making up numbers. It takes us 5 hours to complete this. But instead of charging $50 an hour, I want to charge $70 an hour. It's another way to impact your bottom line and your revenue, right? Third part is you keep the hourly rate the same, you keep your budgeted hours the same, but now you just get more efficient on the job. Instead of it taking you 4 hours to complete, it takes you 3 hours to complete, or 2.5 hours to complete, right? So those are the 3 main things you need to look at and keep an eye on and understand what's happening. in order to grow your business and make money. So that's a lot of information, but that's how you look at, let me see, let's go back to the question. That's how you look at it. Now, I'm not going to go into this because it's just going to be too much, but the last thing in terms of payment could be pay for performance. I'm not going to go into it because I'm still learning it myself and trying to implement it. But basically what it is everyone gets a base pay. And first of all, none of this works if you're paying them cash. If you want to have an actual company, you need an LLC. You need to get them on a W-2. You need to withhold their taxes, which means if you're paying someone $15 an hour, it's more like $17, $18 an hour after you withhold taxes, right? So that in itself is already a major thing that a lot of detailers have to get over, right? And have the money for, you know? But what helps most is it's called pay for performance, where everyone gets a baseline pay of, let's say, $15 an hour. And if there's a job where the employee will get paid 30% of the labor revenue if they meet or go under budgeted hours. So let's say that, like for instance, on a window tint job, because we already kind of ran the numbers. On a window tint job, let's say the base pay is $15, but we charge, $400 for the window tint, and they're able to finish it in 2.5 hours. So if we budgeted, I don't want to do all the math, but let's say what they're actually able to make is between $25 to $45 an hour for that job. So if they're able to complete the work within the budgeted hours or faster than the budgeted hours, they'll get 30% of that. So they'll always have their base pay, but they'll get paid out whichever one is higher. And again, you have to have them as a W-2, like not 1099, not under cash. Like this only works when you have all your numbers in line, right? When you're actually clocking in, clocking out, this only works for that. I mean, you could do it cash, but again, like if you're thinking big picture and you're trying to grow, I mean, you need to be legit. So they're able to actually make between, let's say on the low end, $19 an hour to the high end of like $40 an hour per job. And the reason why you do it like this is because you want to incentivize and you want to be rewarded for working hard per hour, right? So I mean, like I can go back to when I worked at a corporate carpet cleaning company, and we'd work. I mean, I would personally work like a dog, getting through all the work because that's just how I operated. But then you had other people, and they were moving like molasses. They'd been there for 3, 4, 5 years. They didn't really care. The work culture was slow, and there was no accountability. So, I would probably quadruple someone's output, and yet, oftentimes I'd be getting paid less than the other person. Whereas with pay for performance, it incentivizes everyone to be more efficient and to move faster, because if we're able to finish the jobs at or below budgeted hours, we make more per hour. So again, the baseline, like let's say we just priced that job so bad, and it's supposed to be 25 budgeted hours and we budgeted 10 hours for it. Well, then in that regard, everyone still gets paid their baseline of $15 an hour. But on jobs where, hey, we charge $1,000 for this job and we budgeted 20 hours. I'm just making these numbers because it's already a long episode, so just bear with me. We charge $1,000 for this job and we budgeted 15 hours to complete, and they completed it in 5 hours. Then that means they were able to complete the job 10 hours under budgeted hours. So they'll take 30% of that revenue. So now instead of making $15 an hour, that might be $45 an hour for that specific job. And the reason why you do it for that job is because we only make money when we're on a car. Driving to a customer's vehicle, unloading, loading, you make no money. Once you're on the job site and working, that's where you're producing revenue. Right? So on the job, right, you're incentivized to work faster and be more efficient while still maintaining quality, because we want to get under budgeted hours or meet budgeted hours. But when you're, unloading at the shop, when you're driving through, well, I mean, I'm not gonna pay you $45 an hour because we can't. Like, we would literally not be able to afford that. So this is about pay for performance. Is not about a raise. Like you never get a raise, because you can always just make more money if you become more efficient, which is why another reason why that we want to move more towards film services. Because again, on the film services, we can hit 80, 90, 100, $120, $120 an hour per man. And if we're doing that pay for performance incentive, I mean, yeah, they can like you can literally make 25 to $40 an hour working on those jobs, right? So when you're asking me like how do you pay them, that would be the best way to pay someone. But again, it takes such a big learning curve. It takes so much work because then if you just pay someone per hour and you're like, yeah, man, I'll pay you $17 an hour. Well, when you guys are super slammed and you guys are just hammering work away, well, he doesn't get paid more, even though he's producing a lot more and busting his ass. Like he just still getting paid $17 an hour. Whereas if he's hitting goals and he's really on and he's pushing and he wants to get that work done, well, he should be compensated and rewarded, right? Rightfully so, because he's working really hard. So on those jobs, like yeah, you should probably make more because I mean you're working so hard. Whereas on the other side, when the call it the slow season in the winter months, when the schedule just simply isn't as packed out, well, you don't want to pay someone $17 an hour when you don't have nowhere near as much work in the winter than you do in the summertime. So that's probably the best way, because if you just go strictly off of hourly rate, it's typically like it just pay for performance is the best way because you reward them literally on every job. It's not like, oh well, if we work hard for this quarter, we'll get a bonus at the end of the quarter. It's like, no, literally on every job, if you finish it faster, you'll make more money. And again, we ran the math already, and it's a lot harder to hit $30, $40 an hour doing interior details than it is doing some type of window tint, PPF, or vinyl wrap job, right? So it's not. I mean, it's about margin, right? So that's why we're getting away from. And by getting away, I don't mean literally next month. I just mean like now moving forward. If we're 70% details, 30% film, from now until forever, we'll go 70-30, 60-40, 50-50, 40-60, 70-30, and switch it around to film being the majority of the work that we do. So anyway, this was a long episode. Hopefully you learned something, because again, anything short of like doing all this math, you're literally guessing on every single job, every single thing you price when you hire someone, you're literally guessing on everything. Whereas if you look at it like this, you have an objective eye to say, oh, I don't need to hire anyone because we're not at capacity yet. Oh, I shouldn't raise my prices yet because we can't even book out our schedule yet. Right? Or you're saying, man, we're not booked out and we're not making money. Maybe I do need to raise my prices. Right? So this is what tells you and helps you navigate in your business in terms of the next step you should do. So anyways, thank you very much. Hopefully you learned something, and I'll talk to you on the next one.